I grew up in a small town, the kind of place where people still lock their doors at sunset, and where stories about the things lurking in the woods aren't just stories, they're warnings. My family lived in a house on the outskirts of town, right at the edge of a dense forest. I spent most of my childhood exploring those woods, but there was one place I never went, an abandoned trailer deep in the trees, about a mile from my house. My grandfather once told me, that place belongs to something else. He never elaborated, and I never asked. One night, when I was 19, I was walking home from my friend's house. It was late, and the moon was barely a sliver in the sky. My breath came out in misty clouds as I followed the narrow dirt path through the trees, flashlight in hand. The forest was quiet, too quiet. Then I heard something, a rustling in the bushes to my left. I stopped, scanning the darkness. Coyote, I muttered to myself, gripping my flashlight tighter. But then I heard something else, a voice. At first it was just a whisper, barely audible. But as I strained to listen, the words became clearer. Help me. It was a woman's voice, thin and trembling, coming from deeper in the woods. My gut told me to run, but my brain told me otherwise. Someone could be hurt. Hello, I called out. No answer, just the sound of the wind shifting through the branches. Then, just as I was about to turn back toward the path, I heard it again. But this time, it wasn't just a whisper. Help me. It was my mom's voice. My blood turned to ice. My mom was home, asleep. There was no way she was out here. But the voice, it sounded exactly like her. Same tone, same slight laugh she got when she was tired. I took a step back. My heartbeat pounded in my ears. That was when I noticed something else. The forest had gone completely silent. No crickets, no rustling leaves, just nothing. Then twigs snapped. I whipped my flashlight toward the sound. At first, I didn't see anything. But then, in the space between two trees, something moved. It was tall, too tall. Its limbs were long and thin. Its skin stretched unnaturally tight over its frame. But the worst part was the face, or what should have been a face. It was smooth, almost featureless, except for a wide, gaping mouth. And then it spoke. Help me. My mum's voice again. I ran. I don't think I've ever run faster in my life. Branches tore up my clothes, my flashlight bouncing wildly as I sprinted down the path. Behind me, I could hear it moving, fast, too fast. Just as I broke through the tree line and into my backyard, I heard one last thing. Not words this time. Laughter, low, guttural, and wrong. I slammed the door behind me, locking it and pressing my back against the wood, gasping for breath. My mum came out of her room, confused, asking what was wrong. I didn't tell her. What would I say? That something out there had mimicked her voice. That night, I barely slept. Every creak in the house made me flinch, and just before dawn, as I finally started to drift off, I heard it again, just outside my window. Let me in. My own voice. I never walked through those woods at night again. I grew up in a rural part of Arizona, surrounded by miles of desert and jagged rock formations. Our nearest neighbor was a quarter-mile away, and at night, the land was swallowed in total darkness. My older brother Matt and I would often explore the trails near our house, but we always stuck close to home after sundown. Our grandmother had warned us about things that lurked in the desert at night, things that weren't animals, weren't human. Skinwalkers, she called them. I never believed in them. Not until that night. It was late, sometime past 1 a.m., when I woke up to the sound of tapping at my bedroom window. A slow, deliberate tap, tap, tap. I groggily turned over, expecting to see a tree branch swaying in the wind. But there were no trees outside my window. I sat up, my heart picking up speed. The tapping stopped, and for a moment, all I could hear was the desert wind whispering outside. Then, footsteps, crunching across the dirt, moving around the house. My stomach clenched. We had coyotes out here, sometimes even mountain lions, but this sounded wrong. The steps were too heavy, too purposeful. They stopped outside my brother's window. A few seconds passed. Then I heard Matt's window slide open. I jumped out of bed, ran to his room, and flipped on the light. His bed was empty. The window was wide open. Cold desert air poured in. "Matt!" My voice came out thin, shaking. Then I heard it, his voice calling from outside. "Hey, come out here." It wasn't right. It sounded like him, but there was something off. His voice was flat, almost too smooth, like someone was imitating him, but didn't quite know how to get it right. I crept to the window and peered outside. There, just beyond the porch light's reach, Matt stood facing the house. But his posture was strange. His arms dangled stiffly at his sides, and his head was tilted at an unnatural angle. His clothes were the same ones he'd worn to bed, but his feet were bare, pale against the dark ground. Something inside me screamed, "Don't go out there." I swallowed hard. "What are you doing?" A few beats of silence. Then he spoke again. "Come out here." Same tone, same inflection, no emotion. Took a step back. That's when I noticed something else. His lips weren't moving. The voice was coming from him, but he wasn't speaking. I slammed the window shut and backed away, my pulse hammering in my ears. The thing outside didn't react. It just stood there watching. Then, as if someone had hit a switch, it dropped to all fours. Not in a natural way. It was too fast, too jerky, like a puppet being yanked by strings. And then it bolted into the dark. I barely slept that night, keeping my door locked and a knife clutched in my hand. Morning came, and Matt was back. I found him asleep in his bed, breathing evenly like nothing had happened. When I shook him awake, he groaned and pushed me away. "Where were you last night?" I demanded. He frowned. "What?" I told him everything, how he had disappeared, how I had seen him outside, but he just stared at me, confused. "I never left my room," he said. I didn't believe him. Not until I saw his feet. They were clean, no dirt, no scratches. If he had been outside barefoot in the desert, there would have been something. I don't know what I saw that night, but it wasn't my brother. I used to spend my summers at my grandparents' cabin in northern Arizona. It was deep in the woods, far from town, the kind of place where the nights were pitch black and the silence could feel almost alive. I loved it out there. Until the summer, I saw something I can't explain. One evening, just before sundown, I decided to go for a short walk along one of the old trails behind the cabin. My grandpa always warned me not to stay out too late, but I was 17 and didn't take his stories about things in the woods seriously. The air was thick with the scent of pine and damp earth, and the only sounds were the occasional rustling of leaves. I'd only been walking for about 10 minutes when I heard it, the crunch of footsteps behind me. I stopped. The sound stopped. I turned around. Nothing. I told myself it was just my imagination and kept walking. A minute later, I heard it again. A single, deliberate step. This time, when I turned, I saw something. About 30 feet back, half hidden behind a tree, there was a figure. At first I thought it was a person, It was tall, unnaturally thin, and it had long, bony arms that hung at its sides. But something was wrong. The way it was standing, it looked too rigid, too unnatural. And then it moved. It stepped out from behind the tree and into the fading light, and my stomach dropped. It was me, or at least it looked like me. Same face, same clothes, even the same way I stood when I was tired, with one shoulder slightly lower than the other. But its eyes were wrong, too dark, too empty. I should have run, but I was frozen. Then it smiled, not a normal smile. Its lips stretched too wide, and the skin around its mouth cracked like old leather. And then it spoke, but it didn't talk like a person. It copied me. Should have run, it whispered in my own voice. That was enough to snap me out of it. I turned and bolted toward the cabin, running faster than I ever had in my life. I could hear it behind me, crashing through the trees, but I didn't dare look back. By the time I reached the clearing, everything was silent again. I sprinted up the porch, slammed the door shut, and locked it. My grandpa was in his chair, watching TV. He barely looked up. "You saw it, didn't you?" he said. My breath was still ragged. "What?" "The thing that walks like people." I just stared at him. He sighed and turned off the TV. "They don't like being seen. You did good running. Next time, don't even look." I never went into those woods again. And to this day, I still don't know what I saw. But sometimes, when I'm alone at night, I swear I hear footsteps just outside my window. And I never check.